Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Unauthorized TV. Tonight I'm going to talk about false flags in the Gulf, specifically the two false flags that have been widely reported today with regards to several tankers in the Gulf of Oman. And just for those who are not clear on where things are, I was a little confused myself because I was thinking, well, Gulf of Oman, Gulf of Persian Gulf, did they rename it? The Persian Gulf is, the way you're seeing it, over here, and then there's the Straits of Hormuz, and then you've got the Gulf of Oman, which is where it then opens up into the wider ocean. And so what you've got there is a very narrow area, a very narrow seaway that gets very, very constricted and then opens up but is still fairly narrow before. And this is an area where all the oil tankers and so forth have to transit. And all of it, almost all of it, goes along the Iranian coastline. And now they're reporting that a torpedo was fired at a tanker, and then a second tanker was also hit by some sort of explosion, although they haven't claimed that second one was also a torpedo. And this comes in the wake of 4 attacks, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, all of which were unsuccessful. None of them were as serious as the 2 today. Crews didn't have to abandon ship or anything like that. Keep in mind that none of the 6 ships have sunk. Now, how do we know that this is a false flag? Well, it's very easy and it's very obvious for one reason. When a country wishes to go to war, it usually attacks on a fairly large scale. For example, when Germany launched Operation Barbarossa to go to war against the Soviet Union, there were something like 500,000 troops attacking. Pearl Harbor was actually a relatively small attack by war-starting standards. When you look at these smaller provocations, they're almost always fake. They're almost always totally unreal. Whether you look at the Arab-Israeli wars, whether it was the Arabs attacking the Israelis or the Israeli attacking the Arabs, in each case, it was on a relatively large scale. Even when the United States attacked Grenada, the number of forces that were involved were noticeable. You're not talking about 2 ships that are not even warships. Even large-scale terrorist attacks are bigger than the typical false flag. The Lusitania was a false flag. The USS Maine that caused the Spanish-American War was a false flag. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was a false flag. And someone asked on the blog, why do so many of these false flags have to do with ships, the ocean? And the answer is very simple. That's how you hide the evidence. And also, there are fewer things that can go wrong when it's something that takes place on the ocean, very far away from lots of eyewitnesses and so forth. So that's why anytime you see any sort of naval incident being used to justify some sort of military action, you have to be at least mildly suspicious of the legitimacy of the event. And this is particularly true when you're talking about the United States. Anyone could have attacked those ships. There's lots of U.S. enemies there, throughout the Middle East. But it's got to be the one country that the United States has been slavering to go to war with for the past 15 years. Remember, there's a very powerful lobby within the United States. We tend to call them neocons, but call them what you will. And they have been actively agitating to go to war with Iran since 2004, at least. Ben Shapiro was banging on the table and shrieking about how it was the top priority, the number one priority for America to go to war with Iran back in 2004. Michael Ledeen has been writing faster pleas, by which he means go to war with Iran, since probably 2003, if I recall correctly. John Bolton, who by neocon standard, who is a warmonger even by neocon standards and is unfortunately now in the Trump administration, he's been wanting to go to Iran for over a decade. You may recall that long before he died, John McCain was famous for singing "Bomb, bomb, 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 bomb Iran." So the U.S. has been trying to come up with an excuse to go to war with Iran for a long time, more than 10 years. And we're supposed to believe that with a major Persian diaspora in the United States, with complete potential control of that entire coastline, that Iran decides to start a potential war by some feeble attacks on some unimportant civilian ships that it doesn't even manage to sink. How does that make any sense at all? It doesn't make any sense, especially when you understand that at least one of those ships was Japanese flagged, and the Japanese Prime Minister Abe was in Tehran today, yesterday and today, and he was there in order to try to talk the Iranians into being willing to meet with U.S. representatives, which they're not willing to do. Iran, like Russia, like China, has concluded that there's absolutely no point in talking to the United States. Why should they? The United States is not a trustworthy partner. Whatever the U.S. agrees to do, it's demonstrated that it's perfectly willing and able to go back on its word, to the detriment of the people that reached an agreement with them. Muammar Gaddafi being the case in point. Gaddafi screwed up. He trusted the United States, and he died for it. I assure you that the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and frankly, most of the Europeans all learned from that. And what they learned is that U.S. promises are worthless. So why even talk to them? In fact, that's what the Khamenei, the Iranian leader, I'm not really up on Iranian politics. I believe they have like a premier and a president, but only and then there's the mullahs and so forth. But anyhow, he seems to be the one whose opinion matters the most. And he came out right out and said, and told the Japanese prime minister, we have no interest in talking to President Trump. There's no reason for us to talk to President Trump. And so, but you have this group within the United States, the neocons, who desperately want war with Iran, presumably on Israel's behalf. You have some people in Israel, definitely not all of them, you have some people in Israel who want to see the U.S. go to war with Iran while it still can. Because, I was reading about a 40-page paper today, and it was talking about how the U.S. still has an absolute advantage militarily against its various foes and rivals. But despite that global superiority, its actual ability to win in different regions has been severely degraded. Its advantage over its enemies have been severely degraded because despite having developed a very, very effective, a historically effective way of war, the natural reaction and the changing technologies have allowed its rivals to come up with counter strategies that significantly degrade those advantages. And so it's not 1990 anymore. Russia is no longer in complete disarray. China has been getting its act together for the last 20 years. Other countries like Iran have learned considerably from the mistakes made by other United States enemies like Iraq, like Syria, and like Libya, as well as successful resistances as they've seen in places like Afghanistan. And so, you can't ever assume that the world is going to be the same as it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, because people learn and people adjust. And so that's why I think that this particular series of attacks was a series of false flags, possibly by the United States, more likely by independent actors who want the U.S. to go to war with Iran. Now, I don't believe that's going to happen because I believe that Russia and China have made it very clear that they're not going to permit that. Russia made it very clear in Syria that the old game of the U.S. setting up proxy forces and forward bases and establishing air superiority and air supremacy in order to let its ground forces do whatever it needed to do is now over. And a lot of people don't realize that Iran is a very large country, very numerous country. And, like I said, they have a huge presence inside the United States. One of the guys that ran my family's company for over a decade and had worked there for, I think, 15 years before, he's Iranian. Now, I very much doubt that he has any connection to or sympathy for the Iranian government. But the fact of the matter is that there are far more Iranians in the United States now than there were Japanese in the U.S. during at the outbreak of World War II or after Pearl Harbor. And Yet back then, people were less innocent, people were less stupid, and they were deeply concerned about what havoc the Japanese inside the USA could do. I mean, if Iran wanted to go to war with the US, they're not going to put a dent in a few boats in the Gulf of Oman. They're going to simultaneously bring all shipping traffic in the Gulf to a halt, and they're going to strike at multiple targets inside the USA. At a bare minimum. That doesn't even get into, everybody who worries about an attack on Israel. I mean, I'm personally not convinced that that's on the short list, because there's a fair amount of land in between them, and so I don't see that happening. But certainly, they would probably arrange for some sort of a distraction with Hezbollah or something. And so none of it makes sense. Even the reports talking about it being a torpedo make no sense when it's been reported that one of the ships actually had an unexploded limpet mine attached to it above the waterline. Now, obviously, the entire Gulf hasn't been heavily mined, or ships would not be continuing to transit it. So it sounds to me like, somebody screwed up the false flag. That's probably why none of the ships sank. Because they put some mines on it, expected them to blow up, and so they could claim it was a torpedo that sunk the ship. Only problem is, one of the mines didn't go off, the ship didn't sink, and now you've got this absurd situation where you're trying to declare that Iran is trying to start a war by attacking and failing to sink a single civilian ship. Makes no sense. I don't buy it in the slightest, nor should you, in my opinion. So again, anytime you see these sort of small pinprick acts of war, you really need to assume that they're fake. It's not just the U.S. that's engaged in these. A lot of countries have engaged in these. Hitler cooked up a little border incident where they dressed some dead border guards in German uniforms and claimed that they'd been attacked, and then used that to justify, a full-scale invasion. As a general rule, nations that attack other nations don't do so with the metaphorical analogy of a poke on the shoulder. So if you see anything that falls short of a Pearl Harbor style attack, a Manchuria style attack, a Operation Barbarossa style attack, it's probably not real. It's probably not legitimate. It's actually meant in order to provide an excuse for the other side launching a real attack. So keep that in mind, because I don't think that anyone is falling for this. So that means that there will probably be more attempts and more false flags in order to try to provoke the military conflict that obviously somebody wants. So that's my take on it. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe the Iranian military is just really, really stupid. But I tend to doubt it. So not now. So anyhow, keep your wits around you when you read this stuff. If for once the media is reporting favorably on the Trump administration, what else does that tell you? It tells you that for once there's something that's more important to them than attacking the guy. So that's also another sign, another clue. Anyhow, that's it for tonight. We'll see how this all shakes out, but I don't think anything's going to come of it. They've been beating the war drums, like I said, for 15, 16 years now, and nothing's ever come of it. So, the American people clearly have no interest whatsoever in going to war with Iran, and they're right to not want to do so. So, in other news, Unauthorized is doing great. People seem to quite like the first documentary that's up there. We're going to have another great documentary for you next month. And I'll look forward to speaking to you tomorrow night. Have a good evening. This is the Darkstream on Box Day.